Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did. They absolutely got it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host, and I am very delighted to be with you again this week. You know, the Lord is good, and boy, isn't it fantastic that He controls everything and that He gives us breath, He gives us life. And most importantly, in the midst of all the insanities that we have been once again listening to this week, all of the various ideologies and corruptions that are out there this week, the Michael Cohen insanity, the continued Mueller insanity and cabal, all of that and the new Clinton rehammering once again from a congressional investigation. All very, very interesting. All very, very interesting. But it goes to how I somewhat finished last week. I really didn't believe that I had enough time last week to get onto the topic of conspiracy. Conspiracy is very interesting. Conspiracy is that type of thing that can drive people to paranoia. Conspiracy in the modern age has come to this thought process by so many, especially in academia and in government, so-called government entities, that the conspiracy is something that has, this very weird cloud, tinfoil hat connotation. When in actuality, based on the true definition of conspiracy, it is nothing more than a well thought out plan between two or more people. If it's one, it's not a conspiracy, but once you bring another person into it, and to the fact of law. And the fact of law is that the collusion, or people, whatever collusion has in the eyes of the beholder, is not legally offensive. There's no law against collusion. There is law against conspiracy, because conspiracy has a nefarious end. It has the end of taking something down with the intent to destroy, is what a conspiracy has, or the intent to harm. Those are all components of the legal definition, is with an intent to harm or to take something down, like a government. And that's what conspiracy is. There is conspiracy, and has been, and I ended the program last week and in the promo that the churches have been the co-conspirators with the ideology of tolerance, in the extent that it has impacted our society. Well, if you're following what I'm reading to my grandchildren, and you're going to samueladamsreturns.net, and you can see up in the menu, and even at samueladamsreturns.com, I have in the menu now, where you can find right there in the menu, chaplains and clergy. And what that is a link to the book I'm reading to my grandkids. Well, one of the things that I'm doing with that is I am going through it from a foundational perspective that ties right in with the founding of this country, that ties right in with the anti-federalist prediction of today, which we're going to talk about a little bit later. But more so, what it gets to is this, I don't know, is it an existential argument? Is it a intellectual? That's what it is. It's an intellectual argument, even within the context of Christianity, that in these reform circles of Christianity, is that we have these ideas of the theocratic libertarianism. Well, I'm writing about that because I'll tell you what, I go with foundational principles and I don't go with conspiracies. Everything I'm going to talk about today is laid out in fact. And the documentation follows. The documentation is in the promo. The documentation is laid out also in the YouTube video section. The documentation is there at samueladamsreturns.net in the blog for today's program, and it's a matter of fact. And so that's what I deal with. I don't deal with conspiracy from the tinfoil hat perspective because I think that then leads to many, many problems. What I deal with is conspiracy in fact to do harm to individuals and to society in a whole. And to that, where I'd like to start is talking again where I somewhat left off last week, is the co-conspirators at the pulpits. And once again, I have to refer to the Crossroads, it's crossroad.to, the articles that are in there. I'll tell you, these folks have done a wonderful job of synthesizing all that I have read and talked about over the years and the many, 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 many writings that are out there. But what Barrett has written here back in October 2006, I want to start with this, is transforming the world by subverting the church. So let's start out with this little, I have a runny nose a little bit today, folks, so sorry about that, those that are watching me on YouTube. We have here what he says, and I'll start with this as a quote. We have seen how Dr. Walter Rauschenbusch and the leaders of the social action movements in the churches decided to do away with Christian individualism and turn to outright collectivism. Using the church as their instrument, religion was not only a means toward achieving socialism, and like all other false prophets who have infiltrated religion through the centuries, Rauschenbusch used a front or disguise. This disguise, as we have seen, was, quote, the kingdom of God, end quote. The kingdom was not pictured as a spiritual society into which men and women had to be born as individuals through a personal relationship with Jesus Christ as Savior, but as a collectivist society which would be brought about by eradication of poverty, redistribution of wealth, and economic justice. And the major quote was written by Edgar Bundy in Collectivism in the Church. Now here's another interesting quote. Rockefeller promoted universal ecumenism by stating in December 1917, we're going back to all the Wilsonian stuff, and not the Doug Wilsonian, but the Wilson Wilsonian of the 1900s there. And here's what Rockefeller said. I see all denominational emphasis set aside. I see the church molding the thought of the world. I see it literally establishing the kingdom of God on earth, end quote. It was Dr. James W. Wardner in Unholy Alliances, The Secret Plan and the Secret People Who Are Working to Destroy America. Came a quote out of that. Now, I'm not going to read you this whole article, but I'm just going to paraphrase some things with my commentary, as I often do, is that the conspiracies have been around for a long time, battered the church since God warned us, ever since Jesus walked the narrow streets of Jerusalem. Stuff's been going on. He's always had, that conflict has always been there. But the social gospel of the early 20th century shifted the focus on many church leaders from God's unchanging word to the world's pliable illusions. I would argue that the social gospel actually started in the 1800s, the 19th century. As I've shown and proven before, in many of my other programs and that are there in the archives, is that the social gospel is not a 20th century thing. In fact, the social gospel started coming around in those 1820s, 1830s when Fabianism, when that Unitarianism started shifting, and therefore we saw that there was a lot happening there at that time. And then it escalated as we got into the 20th century uh, in that regard. So, but here's the important part, that we had socialist seminary professors, Fabians, socialists, whatever you want to call them at that point, put a name, pragmatic pastors, and deluded idealists validated their visions with hand-picked Bible verses that fit their social message. Offensive words like sin and redemption were redefined, contextualized, or ignored. No need for the cross. See, these are the types of things that have happened in socialism, communism, and all of that, is that, and we see it today. You know, we see it in the end of the 20th century, and now already, almost 2 decades into the 21st century, words have meaning, but boy, if you can change the meanings and manipulate them and make collusion look like it's something more than what it is, my goodness gracious, now you can affect many, many things. So let's move into this whole transformational tactics, and Kathy's showing me I have only 3 minutes. So I've seen it preached, and I heard it preached from the pulpit of the church that I attend, that communism is dead. Not necessarily true. The ideologies are so prevalent, all one has to do is look at the people that got elected, like, what's her name, your favorite, Ocasio, or something, Cortez. Anyway, those, you could look at Bernie Sanders, they call them socialism, democratic socialists, whatever. They're really communist when it comes right down to it, because it's all about control and power in the end game. So with the last, 2 minutes I have? 2.5 minutes. So the Kremlin came up with this plan for the churches. Here's the Soviet plan, the pattern that they wanted to, 1, infiltrate the church institutions. 2, adapt the communist social campaign to America's unique beliefs, wants, and values. 3, concentrate on seminaries where each new convert learns, or each new convert learns to influence thousands. Next is 4, divert the heart and purpose of the church from the spiritual to the material. We've seen that with these mega millionaire preachers out there. And lastly is demonstrate tolerance towards beliefs and values that clash with God's word. Now, it's not just tolerance, it goes beyond tolerance to principle pluralism, which means no religion has a privileged place, says Richard Kierzik, who represents the National Association of Evangelicals at a prestigious 2006 Clinton Global Initiative conference. Ladies and gentlemen, this is in the UN documentation that I've been talking about for 20 years. And here it is being reiterated in 2006. He goes on, I would say one step further, which is to say partnership. The fundamentalists have a pessimistic view of the future, and they have this perception, unlike evangelicals and liberal Christians, that there's an unbridgeable divide between the believer and the unbeliever. We don't believe that. That's what he says. Well, I believe that there is this divide. And the divide is because God calls out that there is a divide. There's a great divide between the holy God and we as sinners. And until we become believers, we are part of and in that divide. Sam Adams understood that. He clearly understood that as the last Puritan. So come on back in the next segment to follow up on those anti-federalists. They got it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they did get it right. And this is Tom Navolis, your host. And we are again not only on YouTube and at samueladamsreturns.net, also here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where Liberty absolutely works for you. Check it out. Hit that donate button and participate. And as well as we're on Blueberry for the podcast. And yes, we're, I guess, on what is that? The iTunes for the podcast. So, you know what? The podcast is out there. I'm drinking water, a little tongue-tied, runny nose, that type of stuff. Hey, we're doing good. And, but anyway, let's continue on because I wanted to get to Melancton Smith because he did a bunch of predictions here on what was happening in Congress and talking about all the different offices. And I'm going to have to slam through that maybe in the third segment. But I think it's important that we finish up with this conspiracy to transform the world by subverting the churches. So I'm going to move a little bit faster in this. And the document link, as you will well note, is in the promo. It's and at YouTube, and then it's at samueladamsreturns.net in today's program. So you have to hit the more button, scroll down through there, and the link to this document is there. So let's get into what's really the key points, the strategies, the fine-tuned strategy components. Number one, infiltration, then mass conversion to a counterfeit system. It's a communist, a former communist leader by the name of Manning Johnson before the Committee on Un-American Activities in 1953 said the plan was to make the seminaries the neck of a funnel through which thousands of potential clergymen would issue forth, carrying with them in varying degrees an ideology and slant which would aid in neutralizing anti-communist character of the church and also to use the clergy to spearhead important communist projects. So any pastor that's out there that says that communism is dead is either choosing to be ignorant, is blissfully ignorant, or is sadly unknowingly ignorant, or has gone through all of this and is just, sucked right into it. Okay, he continues, and sorry about that popping noise. This policy was successful beyond even communist expectations. This is this Johnson dude, in 1953. In 1953, ladies and gentlemen, that is almost 66 years ago. Okay? 1953. This policy was successful beyond even communist expectations. The combination of communist clergymen with a communist ideology, plus thousands of clergymen who were sold the principles of considering communist causes as progressive. Hello. Furnished with Soviet apparatus with a machine which was used as a religious cover for the overall communist operation. You can go read a lot of UN documentation. Anyway, number two, communitarian partnership. This is why so many pastors believe that communism is dead, because the new emphasis and push is on communitarianism. We in the community, we have to get together. We have to do all these wonderful things. Okay, so suppose now that the communists got it, that communism is dead, and what we have is that it is this mythical phoenix out there, and the new thing is communitarianism. And I heard, again, from the pulpit of the church that I go to, communism's dead. You people who believed in communism. I can't. Anyway, So what we have here is that this same communitarianism, which is all part of everything you hear in sustainability and all of this other stuff, excuse me, is that it still is control of the masses through a number of different means. Personal data files and a hierarchy of groups or councils, originally called the Soviets, but we have all these other groups and these other councils that are out there, like what we're dealing with in my county, which is a multi-county regionalization, is all part of this. Are these groups that have no elected bodies but are mandated by the federal government in NOACA, Northeast Ohio Council on blah, blah, blah. You go, anyway, that's not important, but this is the point. They're controlling so much. Okay, so it's already being marketed to the public as decentralized leadership, sustainable development, support networks, and voluntary service. We have a lot of that. Sounds confusing, but here's how it works. Communitarian systems are based on a network of, partnerships between public sector government, private sector business, and social sector, civil society, including the churches. These are what is, you hear out there, a PPP, which is a public-private partnership. They don't work. They cost the taxpayers millions of dollars. I've seen it over and over and over again across this United States, and PPPs don't work. And what they do is they drive us to a whole social mechanism that is not voted on. It's not something that we, the people, from a legislative perspective, have an integral control of. No, they control everything. Okay, so instead of owning everything, so we have this private and social sector that come together, and instead of owning everything, it would just control everything. Its standards already include mental health, which I'm on the county's board of mental health, and I'll tell you, the way that it's established in the state of Ohio is terrible. And it's all unfunded mandates. So your levies, your property taxes go up. And it involves this pluralistic guidelines for religion and values, compassion, tolerance under a socialistic system. You know what? It was always the churches that took care of all of this. Anyway, these folks call out a key example on this Rick Warren dude, on his purpose-driven peace plan, and how it's linked in with the United Nations, was linked in with the Obama administration, Council on Foreign Relations, and other governmental and policy-making institutions that were working on the consensus pattern. And, Rick Warren, I'll tell you what, I'd never been impressed with that guy, and he's some of those mega millionaire pastors that I talked about earlier. Anyway, I'm not going to get into the details of this, but here is Manning Johnson testifying again, and here's some of the things that he says are powerful weapons against individual resistors and a Bible-trained conscience. He says, the communists have an advantage in religious organizations due to the fact that their forces within religious groups are well organized as a totalitarian group. This gives this destructive element a great tactical advantage over all others in the religious organizations who deal with religion as individuals, operating ethics on the basis of an individual conscience before God. Communist strategists counted the effectiveness of their forces not so much on numbers alone, but on the importance of individual loyalty to communism in key spots where a small group can influence large numbers. Thus, one professor of divinity lecturing to future clergymen, who in turn will preach to thousands of churchgoers, is, in the long run, more dangerous than 20 red preachers singing the praises of communism from the pulpit. If an infiltrated body has 1% Communist Party members and 9% are Communist Party sympathizers with well-rehearsed plans of action, they can effectively control the remaining 90% who act and think on an individual basis. in the large section of the religious field due to the ideological poison which has been filtered in by the communists and pro-communists through seminaries. The backlog of sympathizers and mental prisoners of socialistic ideology is greater than the 10% necessary for effective control. We only have 5 minutes left in this segment. 4 is small groups and the dialectic process. I've talked about dialectics a number of times. You can read about it here, but it comes down to what is going on in this 90% and how they're controlled and the way they do it and how it works down into managing workers, prisoners, and students to the local groups or councils where they are trained in the Hegelian dialectic process. One of the things that we see that's happening in here is that the way that this is being implemented and what is going on here within the state of Ohio is through the Board of Education is moving on, and we're seeing it across the country in the social and emotional learning, SEL. SEL, you have to look at that because it comes from the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, CASEL, CASEL. It's all about conformity that transcends the classroom. That is everything that's in here about Hegelian. Shared thoughts and notions how now cheered as authenticity. Confess contrary attitudes. So you have to confess yourself, like whiteness, like maleness, like all of these different things. Oh, I got to confess. Oh, I'm male. I'm white. I'm a Christian. No. Right. Self-criticism for group evaluation. Celebrate communist ideas and heroes, which people don't know that they're doing, and they're really now that's even moving into Muslims. So it's moving into Islam as much as socialism and all these other ideologies. Commit themselves to follow the group consensus. Practice what the group, led by a facilitator, decides. That is all in SEL. That's in this whole thing on this collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning that's being pushed in the state of Ohio. This has taken the Hegelian dialectic and pushing it in all the way down into kindergarten and preschool. Come on, folks. Let's get real here. But this has happened in the churches, and Christian churches and Christian schools are doing the same stuff. So I think we're getting down to our last 2 minutes here. The point that I want to make, and you're going to have to go read the rest of it, is that we have to resist. We have to resist. And that is exactly what I am trying to teach my grandchildren through the chaplains and clergy of the revolution. It's there. These are the ideologies of evil that have been timeless ever since the serpent walked and danced before Eve and tempted her with the lies that he had perpetrated there in the garden. No different. That's exactly what's going on in education, in government, in all of these various areas. And unfortunately, what we see it is in the major denominations, the churches, all these mega churches that are out there, the Catholic Church, and this whole global communitarianism idea that we see everywhere and that we're seeing as what we on the college campuses. It's just everywhere. We have to, only way to fight it is first off is understanding biblical Reformation truth, understanding that there is a great chasm between God and man, God and evil, and that the only way to bridge that is through the cross of Jesus Christ. There's no other way. And then we clearly begin to understand what's the difference between tyranny, despotism, truth, fact, conspiracy, collusion, and all of these other terms in their original sense, original meaning, and original intent. And that also means for constitutionalism, to understand the original intent for constitutionalism in this republic, we have to understand what the founders believed and the majority of them believed on Jesus Christ. So come on back in the third segment when we'll talk about a little bit more of those anti-federalists and how they absolutely had it right. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they absolutely got it right, and I'm going to talk really fast so I can get it all compressed into the last couple minutes. Oh, no, we have 15 minutes, and we're not going to get it compressed, or are we going to get it finished with what I want to talk about with Melancton Smith and back to the Senate and the bureaucracies that he predicted what we have today. You talk about collusion and conspiracy and he predicted it here as well as the other anti-federalists did. I just want to remind you to go to samueladamsreturns.net and find the archive for today's program and go to the links of the researched information that is there down to the references, and you will have it. Do your homework. Go find it for yourself. You know what I say? And I haven't said this for a long time. Hey, you know what? Don't believe me. Don't believe me for supposedly being maybe an expert, but learn for yourself. Study for yourself. Read for yourself. Understand it. You go follow the rabbit holes. I'm not going to follow them for you. I've already done that on my own. I know where the rabbit holes go. And I gave you a solution in the last program. And we're going to talk about it real quick now. We don't have enough time to dig into it. You can take and start going and reading what's in the references there on this here June 25th of 1788, Melancton Smith getting up and talking about the Senate some more, and going and arguing about the amendment on the table that was twofold, was basically the term limits of what the Senate should be and how we should have those term limits on the senators, and that there should be recall. One has to remember that the senator was supposed to be what? Appointed by the state legislatures, not elected by the general public. Melancton Smith even talked about the fact that by even being appointed by the state legislators, the senator would not understand the breadth and depth of what was going on with all the constituents that are out there. So it's impossible for two people to truly represent several millions of people in a state. No, they're supposed to represent the states at the federal level. That was the intention. And, it's a bunch of hokey balokey what we have going on here, because they necessarily don't function according to the purposes that they were intended to function, and they become the playground for the lobbyist. And the state isn't even one of the lobbyists that they play for, unless it's a special interest component of what the state wants. And he warned about all of that. He talked about that there were others who had apprehension, and an apprehension that he had is that the power of recall would not be exercised as often as it ought to be. Wow. That means when a senator starts really messing up, the state legislature had the right to recall that senator and spank them, and if necessary, to recall them to the extent of throwing their backsides out of office and appointing somebody else. That was the right of the states. You can't do that when you elect them in a general election. When you have these goofballs out there that are they're in for life, as we see so many times, then you need to have the ability to go, you're not doing the job, you're not representing the state, you're not finding our best interest as a state. And that even gets to another aspect that he talks about, that the Senate has been generally held up by all parties as a safeguard to the rights of the several states. Interesting. Again, not necessarily doing that. We are now for separating them and rendering them eternally independent, that we may root out the last vestige of state sovereignty. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. That alone, right there, he was talking about it. And that was under the Constitution as it was written. As it was written, he was saying that the senators would forget about the states and that state sovereignty would be gone. 1788, June 25th. Oh, mio mio. He talks about an honorable gentleman from New York. He was talking about those observations, how important all of that was, and that one of the things that was mentioned, he talked about the superior influence over the people. He said that the states would always maintain their importance and authority on account of their superior influence over the people. Wow. To prove this influence, he mentioned the aggregate number of state representatives throughout the continent. But I ask him how long the people will retain their confidence for 2,000 representatives, who shall meet once in a year to make laws for regulating the height of your fences and repairing your roads. Will they not by and by be saying, "Here, we are paying a great number of men for doing nothing"? Did we hear that today? We had better give up all civil business of our state with its powers to Congress, who are sitting all the year round. We had better get rid of the useless burden. That matters will come to this at last. I have no more doubt than I have of my existence. The state governments without object or authority will soon dwindle into insignificance and be deposed by the people themselves. Wow. He's looking at this. Will they make laws of regulate agriculture? I imagine this will be best regulated by the sagacity and industry of those who practice it. Another reason offered by the gentleman is that the states will have a great number of officers that the general government. I doubt this. Let us make a comparison. In the first place, the federal government must have a complete set of judicial officers of different ranks throughout the continent, then a numerous train of executive officers in all the branches of the revenue, both internal and external, and all the civil and military departments. And to this, their salaries will probably be larger and better secured than those of any state officer. If these numerous officers are not at once established, they are in the power of Congress and will all be in time created. Very few officers will be objects of ambitions in the states. They will have no establishments at all to correspond with some of those I have mentioned. Ladies and gentlemen, what do we have? 7 minutes, 5 minutes, 6.5 minutes left. Go and read this. Melancton Smith, June 25th, 1788. He lays it out absolutely clearly, articulates it exceptionally well, and we hear it. We hear it now, especially that we have been indoctrinating our youth for the last 40 plus years in socialism and in fascism and, yes, in communism, to the extent now that, what are the state governments? Let's go call on the federal government for everything. Federal government needs to do this. Federal government needs to do that. Oh, look at what we just happened this past week with this agriculture bill. What a disaster. What a debacle. What another affront on the American people. Go look it up for yourself. The agriculture bill alone, and he was talking Oh, leave it up to those. Don't you think those that were closer to agriculture in the states and all of that should take care of that? No, we need to have the federal government do something about it. Really? So now we have redistribution of wealth legally happening because the power of the people was given to Congress joyfully to help do what? Manage and take care of all of those various different things. Wow, Melanchthon Smith talked about that. And we have the career bureaucrats who now are a cabal that include Mr. Mueller, Dueller, and Schuller, and all of the other, Comeys, Commies, and Romneys. These folks are all in it together because it fits their ideologies of power, which equates then to despotism, which then moves to tyranny over the people. Some of the ones that strongly called out against that during our revolutionary period? Yeah, I'll take it back right where I started, right with the chaplains and clergy of the revolution. Yeah, I'm working on that. It's going to take me a while to put that all together, but I guarantee you it'll be very, very interesting. And you know what? It'll be like my other books up here that I hope you're getting them for a gift. But you know what? For the most part, nobody's going to read it, but I have to do it for my kids and my grandkids in particular, so that there is something out there that is rather concise. If I write concisely, I have to think about that one. Kathy says keep it simple, which I have a hard time doing. But let's think about it. You don't have to think about it, you know it. We have an overbloated federal government that was never intended to be what it is today. It was never to have the control mechanisms that it has. And to the actual fact and reality is that's why they hate Donald Trump, because he's in there, you know what? He's in there as a citizen, as our founders intended, that would be slam dunking the bureaucratic machinery, cabal, and tyranny that is fostered by the despotism that Melanchthon Smith talked about on April 25th, 1788. He argued in that New York State Convention on the ratification of the Constitution, no different than the other anti-federalist. He's just been amazing. What do I have, Kath? 2 minutes? I got 2.5 minutes. Let me see how I can close this up for you. Let's see. He asks, what will be their comparative influence and importance? Sir, I leave you to any man of candor to determine whether there will not probably be more lucrative than honorable places in the gift of Congress than in the disposal of the states altogether. But the whole reasoning of the gentleman rests upon the principle that the states will be able to check the general government by exciting the people to opposition. It only goes to prove that the state's officers will have such an influence over the people to impel them to hostility and rebellion. I don't think that's going to happen only because we know that we have a bunch of wimps, we have a bunch of cowards, we have a bunch of socialists, communists, globalists, and isms in the state legislatures and as governors. They don't understand what a functioning constitutional republic is all about. But you need to. Many of you who listen do know. And that's what it's going to take. And ladies and gentlemen, the action items for you today is to go learn what is happening in your counties, what's happening in your school board. If you want truth, you need to get rid of SEL. You need to get rid of that. Go find out if that's happening in your school district and run for the school board yourself to eradicate our educational system of Hegelian dialectics and socialist communist ideologies hidden in communitarianism. That's a good place to start. Really good place to start. And then figure out what else is happening in all of these other boards, the Board of Mental Health, this one, that one, even down to the cemetery board is controlled in all of these different methods. And guess what? They're all funded through your property taxes. So you're redistributing the wealth through redistribution of wealth through your property taxes. And Samuel Adams and all the anti-federalists have warned us. They've called us out. So you need to understand it. Quit throwing your shoes at the TV and get involved just because the anti-federalists told you to and Sam Adams warned it. So come on back next week when we all return.